Is it possible to have artificial intelligence medical devices placed on the EU market under the MDR? Almost everybody says it's impossible. And I would now like kind of question it, or is it possible? So, and if it is possible, how to do it? Shortly to myself, I have a Matura from Reusbühl, type C, so math, was doing electrical engineering at EPFL, specialization in signal processing, which nowadays is called machine learning or data science. So it's the same content, but different labels. I was 1 year in Georgia Tech in the United States during studies where I learned a lot about biomedical signal processing. That's important for afterwards. Was at UCD in Ireland, in France, in the radiological department where I did my PhD. So I was already from the beginning in the studies in the MedTech domain, to say so. I worked over 15 years in the R&D of a company doing signal processing, biomedical signal processing, and we were allowed to do really everything up to the dev in that company. We didn't publish a lot, which is the drawback, because this means we hadn't any transparency outside what the knowledge was. Meanwhile, I followed or helped advisor a few startups, all of them having the same problem. They come in, have a technology, then on a sudden regulation jumps in, and then a lot of questions pop up for those startups, and then the whole, how to say, challenge starts on the regulatory part. A few of them actually really are using artificial intelligence, and there is, how to say, the qualification of the medical devices is one of the keys. I will come to that. At the moment, I'm at Hochschule Luzern, from which I'm now broadcasting. In parallel, and this is important as well, I am working as a teacher at the University of Lucerne in the law clinic, which actually is a very good part for you should you have a question in law. So the law clinic at the University of Lucerne is taking every semester 1 or 2 cases from industry and or society, and looks from a legal point of view what this means. And we have at the moment going on a project where the results will come out in a few weeks, let's say 1.5 months, about artificial intelligence, MDR, and the legal part. So if you should be interested in those results, you can contact me in about 6 to 8 weeks. In parallel, I'm trainer for MDR, clinical evaluation, quality management, risk management, and all those kind of things for the TÜV Süd Academy, which is not the notified body. It's a sidearm of TÜV Süd. Which gives me at the end a broad expertise in machine learning, AI, data science, especially with respect of regulatory affairs, machine learning. And since 3-4 years, we are really deeply working in the MDR, asking a lot of questions ourselves, bridging technology to medicine, the MedTech bringing to the law, and overall. From that, a few initiatives popped up. One is the Swiss Network for Digital Regulation, which will be published in a few months, where I will be in the board. I was asked now, or being designated as co-chair of an international scientific conference, because they realized what I can. And yes, I did a lot of work, was under the radar for a few years due to teaching. And now slowly I will come up with my expertise and experience I have. So that's what I would like to share. The content will be who I am. That should now be solved. So we will directly go into the MedTech market and the law. Then we will look at the clinical benefit and the benefit risk ratio. For that, the previous presentation was really helpful as a base for me. Partially, then we will look in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep neural networks, the data and the testing, which is one probably of the most important parts. And then hopefully I have a few helpful take-home messages for you. So what is actually the problem? AI software in a MedTech product in the EU. Who has the problem? In my opinion, mainly startups, which are technology-driven. They use the technology learned at schools, make a spin-off for a startup, have an idea, want to start. The health is an interesting topic from a business side. And then sooner or later, better sooner than later, they realized that the technology path is only one part of the game. The regulatory affairs part is a really big part as well. And then soon a big milestone is reached where unfortunately the answer is not fulfilled. Regulatory requirements with respect to AI, and then often a big surprise pumps up. That's why I'm saying the earlier the better, because then the questions are we even allowed to put it on the market or not? At the moment, the question is the question can answered in the way of no, you're not allowed. In a few exceptions, we will be allowed. Let's see what we have there. How do we know that the problem has been solved when the first medical device is approved for the EU-MDR? There exists now one device which includes artificial intelligence, which has been approved, which has MDR. So we can now take that as a kind of good best practice example to see if the theory or the academic part we did is now working. So from that, let's be a little bit more general. The European MedTech market, including Switzerland in that case, even if we are separated since May last year, has changed dramatically, in my opinion, on all levels. So we have a lot of things that have higher requirements, and especially in regulatory parts, namely the medical device regulation. The manufacturer and especially R&D is more in the focus now, much more. On the other side, the quality management and the regulatory affairs departments, units, or how big they are, have grown almost by a factor of 10 in the last few years. And I can promise you the clinical departments will follow for that. One of the arguments you just have seen from Michael, there is a lot of knowledge needed in that part, and I will give a few other ones to add on in this presentation. What is about the MedTech market and lean management? If you look at from this point of view, we have more so-called non-value adding but necessary process. What does that mean? We have 3 stages or categories of operations. We have waste, which should be avoided. We have non-value adding but necessary tasks to do, and tasks which give a value, an added value to the medical product. And unfortunately, approval, regulatory documentation goes in the yellow part, means we cannot declare it red as waste. We have to do it, but it's not really giving added value, or at least it feels like that. Further on, the MedTech's lament, to say so, is not heard. In contrary, what I hear when I'm in the political burn, for example, a few times per year, then they say, no, we increase patient safety, everything is fine. That's why we have those new regulations. The goal is achieved. On the other side, we have the so-called revolution. I don't know yet if it becomes a fast evolution or a revolution triggered by digitalization, which AI is a part of, meaning that we have even more requirements, challenges to be addressed. So it's not an easy domain to say so. Furthermore, the medical device regulation, which we will see, is one or parts of is a very complicated document. It has been attributed as one of the 5 most complicated documents in certain areas. I'm unfortunately missing the link yet. Up to now, as soon as I have it, it's sure I will bring it in. I have experienced that myself. If you jump into the MDR, it's becoming like an endless story or a forest, which becomes more and more darker the deeper you go in. And it seems sometimes like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, but that's a feeling as well. So let's switch to law. Why I am doing this? Because I think this is something important we sometimes often underestimate. So if you take the federal constitution of the Swiss Confederation, for example, and similar texts are presented in other countries in Europe as well, then you will read in Article 118, which is concerned to health protection, that the Confederation shall, with the scope of its power, take measure of the protection of health. It shall legislate on the use of foodstuff, as well as therapeutic products, narcotics, organisms, chemicals, and items that may be dangerous to health. So what that does now mean, everything which is a medical device goes under that 118(1)(2)(a), which means, otherwise said, a MedTech product is primarily a risk from a law point of view and has no added value. If you tell that an engineer starting in the R&D department, he will first be silent for a few seconds. So this means it's related risk, so the related risk to the MedTech product needs to be regulated or controlled, which is the case in FDA's domain or the US. And that's where the focus is from the regulatory point of view. So the state says that he has to protect the health, and the MedTech product primarily is looked as a risk and not an added value. If you have understood that, you might understand why everything on the regulation goes to risk management, why you have to look at that. And the good thing in the MDR is that we have now a kind of counterpart, which is the clinical benefit. And that's probably the part that the company now should focus more on in sense of giving a counter power to this regulatory part. So this is the kind of where all this is coming from. So if you want to place a medical device on the EU market, you probably all know that already. You have to follow a CE, which means Conformity European Process. That's why it's CE mark. This is not an approval as with the FDA. I think most know that. And the rules for that conformity European process for medical devices is in the EU-MDR. And if you go into the definitions of the MDR, which is here a print screen of, then conformity assessment means the process of demonstrating whether the requirements of this regulation relating to a device have been fulfilled, which means we have to show that we haven't have any risk or only acceptable risk for the device, having just realized what in a constitution is written. So let's go a little bit away because I do not want to make too much law. I will go back to law again. So we have a product idea. That product idea will be translated in requirements which become more and more specific. From the product idea, we want to have a producible product. That's what the engineer is used to or is learned to do. So he knows the product idea and he wants to design a product which is producible, which can be transferred. Other name means design transfer in the design control from FDA to the production unit of the manufacturer. On the other side, we have the requirements. We have to show that the product is testable and sellable. So we have some obligations that we are allowed to sell the product, which means we have regulation jumping in. And in the case of MDR, this is the technical documentation, which actually is the base for this conformity assessment process. So that's a little bit globally said what is happening in the product development in a medical device. Then everything else is kind of implementation. If you do a phase stage model or a V model or Scrum or whatever, the differences between the companies do start. But I think this slide here is globally what everybody's points are. So what is the process? And I'm showing just right the results, not showing where this is coming from with a small explanation on the next slide. So just to give me a chance to show what the results are before I explain why. So what you need is first a general description of the device, often not well done. That's an experience I have seen being drawn from the product idea. That should be validated internally as the first thing, which claims what you want or what we want to do as a manufacturer. Second thing is that you describe the clinical benefit based on the general description, which is then used for the process of clinical evaluation and which is needed for the benefit risk analysis ratio. So you see the counterpart to the risk management, in my opinion, has to be already at that point. Because if the R&D engineer does not know what the clinical benefit is, then regulatory-wise, there won't be enough documentation and arguments for the benefit risk analysis EA ratio. Once this is done, and only once this is done, you go to the intended purpose, not equal to the intended use, and the intended user. This is central for the qualification and classification of the device. Then the intended use can be drawn from it. And a lot of people tell me, why do you do this so stepwise? Because I'm saying this is like a flow chart. Do one after the other and do it concretely, because everything else is then just kind of a good derivation. And otherwise said, if you don't do those bases good in a good way, then everything else is a conclusion. And from signal processing, we have this kind of sentence or boss sentence, garbage in, garbage out, which means if you start with garbage here, then it's not a big surprise that at the end, the technical documentation looks like how it often looks like. So let's look at the Annex II technical documentation from the MDR, where all those requirements are described. The technical documentation, and if applicable, the summary therefore to be drawn by the manufacturer shall be presented in a clear, organized, readily searchable, and ambiguous manner that shall include in particle the elements listed in this annex. So actually, that's our output. So we have the product on one side and we have the technical documentation on the other side. Those two pieces are very important. So if we don't do the technical documentation in a good way, we have already a problem. Why I'm highlighting here clear, organized, ready, searchable, and ambiguous manner? Because we know from the MDCG initiative that I'm part of, so this is Medical Device Knowledge Unit, there will be a community soon be on the web available as well, where you can look what those people are doing. We have talked with notified bodies, and almost 60 to 70% of the points that come back are the following. The notified body says it's not there. If you go into the technical documentation, you see it's there. So what's the problem? The problem is that the notified body has itself fixed resources. And if he doesn't find a certain item he is looking for, he will stop after 2-3 minutes of search and then saying it's not there, because it's easier to say it's not there than, as I said, honestly, I have not found it, which is a different kind of sentence. So often it comes back with the mentioning it's not there, and the people say, well, it's there. So the problem is that this kind of organization of the technical documentation. But that's another topic, which is one of the research topics I'm working on. How can we do that in a more optimal way, meaning using digital tools as well? As shown before, by a button, you create a PubMed publication. Maybe we will be able in 10 years to have, by a push button, technical documentation as well within a second or so. So that's one thing. But the other thing, which is in my opinion much more important, is the device description. So let's see what it's actually written in that document. The document says that you have to name the product or the trade name, clear, because we're talking here about the legal document, and the general description of the device including its intended purpose and intended user. Nothing said about intended use. So you do first a general description, then the intended purpose, the intended user. So what I'm saying is just taking kind of what is asked by the technical documentation. Basic UDI, I'm not going to enter it. Then C is the intended patient population with medical conditions to be diagnosed, treated, and monitored, which means as well, we can from that directly draw the clinical benefit. Then D, principle of operations, which is kind of clear. And then the E, which is a rationale for the qualification as a medical device. And F, then the risk class. Why I'm doing all that? Because we need that highly for artificial intelligence to tell those people they have to do this step by step by step. And if you don't do it with the focus of your software, which is an AI, you will be already in a problem. So qualification, is it a medical device, yes or no? So first is there AI and this Article 2 in line? So let's look what a medical device is: diagnosis, prevention, monitoring of a disease, the same for an injury or disability, investigation, replacement, modification of the anatomy, providing information by means in vitro, and there are other points as well. But what I would like to mention here, most cases I have seen up to now go into the domain of diagnosis. So there is mostly kind of diagnosis of a disease. For example, BeRace, which has a product in mammography, where they do the interpretation of CT scans or mammography pictures. And it's clear where they want to go. They want to diagnose, say, is there a cancer, yes or no? If you use machine learning, for example, in post-market surveillance, that's not a medical device, that's a tool, and the tool only has to be validated, not to be documented. So already there, be clear if that what you are using from its intended purpose becomes a medical device or not. I will give another example afterwards where we have kind of borderline. That's one thing. Then, once we know that it is a medical device, we jump really fastly in this famous rule 11, which all of us really love. And I can tell you why I do not like it that much, because first, I was searching for a definition of software in the medical device regulation. There are so many definitions in that document, but you don't find any for software. It's just missing. So they have a rule for software, and software is not defined. So no definition. Then second, and this is in my opinion even worse, or more challenging to say so, we only have outcomes. So for example, death, irreversible deterioration, a serious deterioration. We don't have severity and probability. So we only have the severity. So what is known from risk management, we only have one dimension, the impact, and not the probability. So the rule actually is not a risk classification, because risk means that the probability should be taken in. Now you would say, yeah, sure it is. Yeah, sure it is. There is may cause, but may cause means if the probability is higher than 0, it's a may, so it can happen. So the probability is it happen anyway, so you have to accept it, and if it's there. Then the other thing, all other software is classified as class 1. I'm not going to enter there. It's just kind of known that medical devices cannot become software medical class 1. I will show you in a minute why this is kind of misled. It should be possible in a few cases, but again, for that you have to know exactly what you're talking about. And that's a little bit what you hear. I'm stressing here really kind of definitions before I'm jumping into the domain. So let's go in risk management, Annex, and look what there is meant again for the fundamental risk concept versus hazard. So we have a hazard, a sequence of elements and sequence of events with a certain probability gives a hazardous situation, with a certain probability gives a harm. So the probability goes into it. So we have the probability and the severity of the harm, which goes together. So actually rule 11 is not working on harm. Rule 11 is working on hazard. That is kind of to know. So, but then the main sentence that often I hear, software never killed someone, true, but the software might be an important part of the causal chain. So of the sequence of events. And now you see how I'm going from global more into detail. So if you know what you're doing, and if you know what your artificial intelligence is doing in this sequence, you get a much better view of what kind of risk management orders you have to take, and how you can argue such that at the end you have a higher benefit to risk ratio, which is actually the goal at the end for this talk, because that should be the outcome. So one criticism from my side just a few minutes ago was that there is a missing definition for software, but there is this MDCG document, famous one, where the software actually is defined. For the purpose of this guidance, software is defined as a set of instructions that processes input data and creates output data. And input and output data are defined as well. I will leave up that to you. But important is that we have input data that we process by instructions, and we create therefore output data. We will see that in a minute why this is important. And in the same document, often this table here or this figure is shown. But what often people do not show is that this table does not take into account MDSV, which is class 1. So this table is not an argument why we don't have class 1 medical software devices. It's just said that this table is not part of that subclass. So there is a kind of misunderstanding or not taking all the available information together, but this is not a kind of criticism. It's more like those documents are really complex. You have to read one by one. Those things take time to get aware of where actually are the points. And if you do it fast, in the sense of USMR and quick and dirty, a lot of mistakes can unfortunately happen. So going back to what to the definition of a medical device, I just said there might be a few cases. So what about, for example, of screening software? AI in the MedTech environment will be very strong for screening. So why not allow a screening software, for example, in mammography, to say we just screen for that disease. We do not diagnose it yet. We just screen for it as a help tool to support the medical doctor. So you see already, by writing the intended purpose of your device correctly or very detailed, you can already say, I am not a medical product anymore, which means you can kind of leave all the rest outside. I am pretty sure that the regulators will find that soon as well, and then we'll do another kind of partial regulation amendment or an MDCG document, which is then closing that gap as well. But at the moment, we have that. So that's for screening. So we had the MedTech market, the law. Now let's go into that clinical benefit finally. So we have Chapter 6, Article 61, clinical evaluation. A lot of people do not read that, but actually they should read it, because confirmation of conformity with relevant general safety and performance requirements. So we're talking only about GSPRs, set of Annex I under the normal condition of the intended use of the device and the evaluation of the undesirable side effect and of the acceptability of the benefit-risk ratio referred to, shall be based on clinical data providing sufficient clinical evidence, including applicable Annex III, which is the post-market surveillance. So further on, it said the manufacturer shall specify and justify the level of clinical evidence. So it's you as a manufacturer specifying, if you are the expert, why you think this is the case to do so. So let's go into the definitions 44, 41, 51, 53. So first we have to know what is a benefit-risk ratio. Or let's go even further. What is a clinical evaluation? This means a systemic planned process for continuous generate, collect, analyze, assess the clinical data penetrating to a device in order to verify safety, performance, including clinical benefits. So what is a clinical benefit? This means the positive impact of a device in the health of an individual. So here we are. Law primarily says the device is harm, risk, and here the MDR helps us. The MDR says there is a positive impact on the device. So we as a manufacturer should focus on that positive impact and really well argue what that positive impact is. Once you do that, the benefit-risk ratio might be more positive, because for the same risks you have with a better benefit, the benefit ratio becomes more positive. So you see a little bit how the argumentation should be done. So now what's the problem with AI? Finally coming to artificial intelligence. So AI first is a buzzword. There is no clear definition. If you want to know more on that, you can contact me later on. We did a few investigations. What are the available definitions? How can they be used or misused? And honestly, we don't have any problem as long as no deep neural networks are used. So everything which is expert systems and things like that goes today under the umbrella of artificial intelligence as well, but that's not an issue. So as long as you're not using deep neural networks, I would say you don't have a problem. If you if you do market that as artificial intelligence, then it might be that the notified body comes aware of, uses the definition he is using. So you see, you have to define in the company what is artificial intelligence in your company for that certain device or specific device. And then you can kind of argue what it is. I give you a few insight. But first, what is a deep neural network? We have weights which have to be learned by machine learning. You probably all have already seen those nice diagrams with dots and lines. You will see one soon as well. So the data replaces the expert or the expert guidance. The delegation to the clinician is not possible anymore. I will explain myself now. This is now from FDA. I fortunately got that. This was from a presentation 1.5 years ago, where they showed what the difference is, and what they call kind of is machine learnness. So we don't have 0, 1. We have 0 if you have clinical rules on the left side with an algorithm, rule-based systems which take a rule, put this as an algorithm in, and then you verify that that algorithm is actually doing what in such clinical guidance is said. And yes, this is mainly for diagnostic purposes, in this case here, ECG as an example. But If you take machine learning, artificial intelligence like neural network, then the MLness is 100%. So the situation is different. You have data triggering your model. And then we come to that second slide from the FDA. An algorithm is then a model plus the data. It's a little bit like what my former presenter said. With results is then the device plus physician. We have the same effect here. So we not only have the model, we have the data. So the model is a network, as you see here with the Paramedia AI network, which was presented from FDA, but we have the data as well. And what is important, the model is trained with the data. So the weights within that model will be driven by the data, not by any clinical guidance, expertise. That's why I said before, we cannot delegate anymore to the clinicians because it's not impossible. The data triggers now. So we are now in the situation like I've just explained beforehand in a clinical study. So how? But that's one point. Another point is the testability of a deep neural network. We can do here only black box testing. So meaning functional testing. This means that we test on requirements and specification, meaning a decision table test. But that goes fully in line with the definition of software, which says that we have input data, a set of instruction and output data. So we say we know what the input is. We do not know what the black box is doing. We know the output. And if the output is what we have predicted, then we would say the algorithm is doing the correct thing or the software. We cover as much as specific behavior. We cannot do any gray or white box testing because that would mean we have to go into the code. We have to see all the weights and explain why a change in the weight of such a neural network would have which impact at the output. That is possible if you have a flow chart with an algorithm, rule-based algorithm to say so, but that's not possible anymore with a deep neural network because it becomes so complicated that a man is not able to explain why a change of the weight at a certain specific place has this output. So the explainability of the deep neural network is much, much more difficult than with a rule-based. And that's why the FDA kind of introduced this machine learnness. So if you are on the rule-based side with 0% machine learnness, then you can do gray and white box testing because you have a code, an algorithm, and you can show if that algorithm actually is doing what it was implemented for. If you are on the other side, 100% machine learningness, then this becomes impossible. So the testing of the device becomes different because you are not allowed or not able to do gray or white box testing anymore. This is something that the engineers have to know. Remark here that highly actually depends on the specific case. If you want to get expertise or help, then please be aware that you need that and let's give you the help and you can come to my place or somebody else. There are consultants even in Switzerland which are able to help you in this kind of problems. So we have done that. So let's now go into the data as we have seen that the data is highly important and the testing with the data. So let's see how at the moment a state-of-the-art machine learning engineer would design a machine learning model or AI. We have different sets, set A, B, C, up to X. If we have multiple sets available, we put them into what is called a derivation set. So we pull them together. And then there's a randomization for training set, cross-validation set, and test set. And this is set to prevent the under and overtraining of an AI, which is one of the key problems in AI, but this is already known from expert systems as well 20 years ago. So under and overtraining is a topic which is known. So data science and machine learning domain, there is enough knowledge about that. So now if we switch to the MedTech domain, so we have now that algorithm, it's clinically validated and freezed goes out. We do post-market surveillance, post-market clinical follow-up. But the question is, how do we assess the risk? What do we do if we have a bug after the market entrance? And how do we update a frozen AI? So let's step back a little bit in history. So the old school of algorithm development, as I have learned it, is the following. You have set A, B, X again, you have a randomization, but this time the randomization does a derivation set and a validation test set. So you have a validation or training set, or derivation training set, whatever nomenclature you want to use, or validation test set. This was at that time meant to prevent over and under training. Then you went out, do it post-market surveillance, which was not named as that those times. You do a data collection, you create a set C, which gives you an update. You do the randomization again, and you go on. But now you see already where I probably will go. We have here cross-validation training set, test set, nomenclature, subsets. And we have here kind of derivation training set, validation test set. But we see as well, this is not matching somehow. So what actually should be done from an academic point of view nowadays is you have those sets A, B, C to X. You do an assessment of the eligibility, with how you do it in a randomized control. You do a randomization to a derivation and a validation set. You give the derivation set to the AI ML engineer. He is doing his subpart, but he never will see the validation set. He will be blind for that set. Then you have the freezed AI, and you go against that clinical validation, and then you go out, have a clinical validated freezed AI. And now we have a plan. We have a kind of test plan, then we can say, where do we address which risk? And we try to say we are not able to do white and gray box testing, but now we focus much more on the black box testing and do that with more awareness, such we can lower the risks arising by not being allowed doing white and gray box testing. So go a little bit deeper. We need to create evidence. So a machine learning engineer, or what I would call afterwards a MedTech clinical data scientist, need to show this evidence which we need for the clinical benefit. So we do an assessment of the eligibility. Are those data eligible for what we want to do? This is a selection process. We know from clinicians that the inclusion-exclusion criteria are critical, because this can reduce the generalization, external validity. So we might not study the real life, and the interventional analysis is suboptimal if this is done the wrong way. And we will introduce undesired bias. So we know already where the risks are, so we can do countermeasurements in our plans and say we know that. Here we address the problem. And yes, again, this highly depends on the specific case, but the method overall might be the same. So the second part is the randomization. This is actually a shuffle process. The aim is to reduce the bias, the confounding. We want to find a cause-effect relationship when we have interventions. So, for example, therapeutic interventions in the clinical environment. And there we want to see the difference between the intervention and the control group. So if you give the drug to one group and you give the placebo to another group. So, and then we compare those two groups to see the effect of the intervention. The same can be done by creating a blind and control data set in diagnostics. So the blind data set is there as if the patient would not get the appropriate intervention at all, or as if they are not diagnosed, which means they won't be treated. And now you see how the comparison goes. This is the untreated group, and the interventional group is the one which will be diagnosed, where the person actually is doing the training, so the machine learning part. Critical, how you do the randomization. Here again, ideally, you would do that prospectively. So before you start collecting data, you say how the randomization is done, because you know already which biases and confounding you want to reduce. But often this is done retrospectively, which makes it more difficult. But you can simulate that prospectivity by writing the plan already, and then say we just execute the plan. And yes, be aware of any possible bias and confound it beforehand. So now if I'm showing that to MedTech engineers, they do not understand all those details. Why that? Because they are not trained for that. Engineers in the R&D department are not trained like clinicians designing clinical studies. I had the fortune that I was 7 years in the crib in Basel, seeing how studies were designed. I was even helping myself to design such studies. That's where those kind of expertise is coming from, actually. So go even back. So we have the algorithm design now. We have those things. The importance is this blind set, validation set, that we have a blind part. And I mean really a blind part where the engineer is blind, but this means as well that the ML engineer is not allowed to handle the data anymore. So we need a kind of four eyes principle, which means we need a data scientist handling all those parts which are data, clinical, which is trained like somebody who's doing clinical studies, who is aware of what are biases, what are possible confoundings, and yes, unfortunately or fortunately, you can see that either way, MDR actually creates the need of a MedTech clinical data scientist, which is trained for those kind of things, fulfilling that gap, such that you are aware of what you're doing and you can do it preactively. So training set then is used for the training of the parameters. The cross-validation set is then used to compare the different models with the different complexity to find the optimal model, because you can do it more complex or less complex. And the test set is then to check the under or overtraining on the selected models. Possible AI models are linear regression, logistic regression, and up to deep neural networks. So this machine learningness proposed from the FDA actually is a very good hint to show where you are. Short example to provoke a little bit, but to explain as well. So if you want to detect fever, you want first ask why, because you want to treat or not to treat that child. But then you are asking, what is the risk for the fever? Why actually do I treat? I want to reduce somewhere a risk. In machine learning, you would more focus on the outcome, on the event, not what is the temperature. You want to know, is the patient, in that case a small child, is it healthy or not? What is the disease, and not what is the temperature? So you see the focus is more on the medical part. So this is already a kind of example how you see that we focus then in machine learning, artificial intelligence, more on different objects. So we are not delegating those kind of things to clinicians anymore. But we do actually exactly the same. We are asking more questions like an MD does. When you call the doctor and say, "Ah, my child has high temperature," he is asking questions. How does the child move around? What's the behavior? Is it lying and complaining? Are there additional symptoms you can see? But that would mean for a fiber thermometer, in this case, that you need an app where you are asking for those additional inputs, like the MD would do, to get more information, to actually know afterwards what it is. Shortly, what is the risk of high fever? The fibrillized seizure is actually in small children a problem. Everything else, damage and brain damage and even death and those kind of things are highly criticized, as you can see on other parts. So actually, we want to protect a person, a small baby, for that. But then my next question comes clinically. What is the risk of a treated fiber? Because now I am diagnosing and saying the person is at risk for a febrile seizure. So I have a different topic, not measuring the temperature. But then in the chain of risk management, I have a therapeutic product which becomes again a danger to health. And that question I leave up to you. What is actually the risk if you take a temperature reducing medication? You can read the papers inside, and I can tell you, you might be a little bit shocked when you see what is written there. So aspirin, for example, meanwhile, should not be taken anymore. There are a few studies not mentioned by key opinion leaders because they do not like the output, which give kind of hypothesis that aspirin per se is not only a good thing, but it's a harm. But we have started with that. A MedTech or a therapeutic product, primarily from law point of view, is a harm, a danger to health. So you have to ask yourself as well, if the diagnosis is said yes, what are then the consequences? And from that point of view, do the risk management. So you see the risk management in artificial intelligence is, from a global point of view, the same. You just have to think differently. Last slide from my side, some takeaways from my side. Software EU-MDR Rule 11 has only severity dimension. Be aware of that. AI can be software as a medical device, SAMD, or software medical device if you take the European nomenclature, or part of a medical device. These are two different situations. I was not jumping into it. I was talking only about the software part, but if that goes into a device, the complexity becomes even further. And for that, we could do a second presentation of 45 minutes. So I omitted that a little bit, but take that takeaway with you. Then focus on the clinical benefit more and more, because this is the counterpart to the risk. If you use DNN, focus on a clinical MedTech data scientist or somebody which can take over that role and not on the ML engineering or the AI. That can really help to refocus, reshape things. And yes, as I said already a few times, every situation is different. Ask for expertise, help in your specific case. For that, I'm done, and I'm sure there will be a few questions, if not more than just one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. That was a real deep dive into not only the law aspect, but also the technical aspects of how to work with data in an artificial intelligence scenario. If I ask you this question, let's say that I have this startup that you're talking about, and I have an AI product that I want to bring to the market. Would you have any advice to me whether does it matter if I do this in the US or in the EU? Am I more likely to have success from a certification point of view? I mean, dealing with the notified bodies and the regulators?
The success rate in the US at the moment is higher. You just can look at a few publications just being published from the University of Zurich, from a colleague of mine in the law domain, that we have much more AI in the US being on the market at the moment. But if you are a European manufacturer, another dimension jumps in. It's clear that the US will, at the moment, how to say, officially, I should not say that, but unofficial, I can say they will give internal companies, US companies, a little bit a higher priority in the sense of saying, okay, we close a little bit the eyes more. But in the US, there's another thing going on, which actually could be a help for Europe. We have large tech companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, which are coming more and more into health tech. And when they see all those kind of regulations, they see, sorry, we are not going to do it. What they do, they go to the FDA, go in a kind of consultancy process with the FDA. And that is now changing a little bit the mood or the ruling of the FDA as well, which in my opinion is not the case in EU. So kind of, if you can go to the US, I would go first. But there's another thing. And that's what we do here in Switzerland with a few companies. Ask yourself really in the beginning, is this really a MedTech product or is it a health tech product? Because if it's a health tech product, you go first on the market with that. And you have a business plan that you first acquire data. So you do post-market surveillance already like you would be a medical device. You collect all those data, then you have seen why these processes are important, such when you want to declare your device intended on the intended purpose as a medical device, then you more easily can switch. And by that, you gain time and you might have already a return on invest at a lower threshold as if you declare the device to be a medical device. So I would be very careful and really focused on, do I really want to declare that as a medical device or not, if there is AI included?
That sounds like a wise advice. So if I still am in a situation where I want to push something in the European market, I mean, you know the auditors, you know the notified bodies. If I present an AI product to a notified body like TÜV Süd or BSI or someone else, are they going to flip on me? Am I ever going to get my product through there?
I'm not allowed to name the notified bodies, but there is one which has, as I said, declared conformity for an AI product. So I would first to go to that one. There are other ones which are, how to say, more restrictive and more academic, where the chance is much lower to go through. So you will be flipped back. And there are other ones which are careful, but somehow through time now have understood that they should take the risk and go with you. So probably an advice here is you have to know the people and really work close with them together to have a kind of bringing your product through. I saw the same thing happening on agile methods. So agile methods in MedTech is not really functioning if you look at the regulation character by character. But I see now a trend or a change in the trend that more and more notified bodies have engaged young people as well. And they say, easy, I can understand it. That's how it works. It's safe.
Brilliant. So everybody, you know who is your AI go-to guy from now on. Roger is number one. He will stay with us a little bit in the chat. If you have questions that you want to ask him, you can do so in the chat, or you can reach out to him on LinkedIn, connect with him and ask your questions there. I'm sure that he will take some time to answer them. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you too.